Captain Alex Sterling had been to many places across the galaxy, from distant moons to alien cities, but nothing prepared him for the royal court of the Vierks. The space station where the diplomatic talks were being held felt different from anything he had encountered before. The air was thick with a mysterious energy, and every corner seemed to whisper secrets of an ancient, advanced civilization. As he stepped off the shuttle, Alex adjusted his uniform and straightened his posture. The royal palace of the Vierks stretched before him, towering above with its high walls made of translucent materials that shimmered in the light. It was a blend of technology and nature, with glowing plants hanging from the edges of the building and streams of water flowing through the walls. The Vierks people were not like anything Alex had ever seen. Their skin was a soft hue of blue and silver, and they moved with an elegance that made him feel out of place in his human body. The delegation of humans was there for one reason: to negotiate peace between Earth and the Vierks. Tensions had been rising in the galaxy, and a misunderstanding between the two species had almost led to war. Alex, chosen for his diplomatic skills and level-headedness, was determined to ensure that didn't happen. He was escorted through the halls by one of the royal aides who gave him brief but respectful glances. There was no mistaking it. This place was full of power. The walls themselves seemed to hum with authority. As Alex approached the royal chamber, his mind raced. He had been in similar situations before, but this felt different. The Vierks were ancient, their wisdom stretching back thousands of years, and yet there was something that felt alive in this place, something that wasn't just politics. When the doors to the grand chamber opened, Alex was met by a sight that stole his breath. The Vierks princess, Orlaia, stood at the center of the room, surrounded by her advisors. She was unlike anyone Alex had ever seen. Her features were sharp yet graceful, and her presence seemed to fill the entire space. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back like a river of light, and her eyes, a pale violet, seemed to shimmer with untold knowledge. The moment Alex stepped inside, she turned to face him. For a brief moment, their eyes met. There was an intensity in her gaze, something that felt like a challenge and an invitation all at once. Alex had met royalty before, but this was different. It was as if the weight of the universe rested in her eyes, and yet she smiled, a smile that was at once both regal and warm. "Captain Sterling," she said, her voice like the softest of winds, carrying a weight of authority. "Welcome to our home." Alex nodded respectfully, but he couldn't help the way his heart raced. "Thank you, Princess Orlaia," he replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's an honor to be here." Orlaia stepped forward, her movements fluid and almost ethereal. "The honor is mine, Captain," she said, her voice laced with curiosity. "I've heard much about your species. I find humans fascinating." Alex tried to hide his surprise. The Vierks had been known to be distant, preferring to keep to themselves. The fact that Orlaia was so open, so welcoming, was something unexpected. "We have our quirks," he said with a small smile. The princess laughed, a sound that was light and melodic like the ringing of a bell. "I can see that," she said, her eyes twinkling with amusement. "But tell me, Captain, how do you humans cope with such a vast and dangerous universe? Do you ever feel small?" Alex considered her question for a moment. It was a question that he had asked himself many times. "We don't have a choice," he said simply. "We adapt. We keep moving forward even when things seem impossible." Orlaia tilted her head slightly, as if intrigued. "And yet, despite the odds, your species has thrived. That is impressive. We have much to learn from you, I think." Before Alex could respond, one of the royal aides stepped forward, breaking the moment. "Your Excellency," the aide said with a slight bow, "the negotiations are ready to begin." Orlaia nodded and turned back to Alex. "Please follow me," she said, her voice warm but commanding. Alex followed her into the meeting room, where a large table was set, surrounded by Vierks officials and his own team. As they took their seats, Alex couldn't help but notice the way the princess carried herself. There was something magnetic about her, something that made it hard to focus on the task at hand. Yet, Alex knew he had a job to do, and he pushed aside any distractions. The meeting began in the usual manner: formal introductions, briefings on both sides, and a long list of terms that needed to be agreed upon. The Vierks had their demands, and Earth had its own. But through it all, Alex couldn't help but glance at Orlaia. She seemed to listen intently, but there was an undercurrent to her gaze. She was studying him just as he was studying her. Hours passed, and the negotiations continued with little progress. It was clear that both sides were reluctant to make the first move. Frustration began to settle in the room, and Alex could feel the tension thickening the air. It wasn't until a moment of unexpected relief that things began to change. As the room fell silent, one of the Vyerk's advisors made an offhand comment about human customs. The words themselves were not important, but Alex, trying to lighten the mood, decided to make a joke. "Well, that's one way to look at it," he said, grinning. "But I think you might like humans better if you just called us sweetie." The room fell silent for a split second before Orlia's face flushed a soft pink. The princess, of all people, blushed. Alex was taken aback for a moment, unsure if he had crossed a line. But when she looked up at him, her violet eyes sparkling with amusement, a small smile crept onto her lips. "Yes, darling," she replied, her voice teasing yet soft. The laughter that followed was unexpected and genuine. It was the first time since arriving that Alex felt the tension break. Even the Vyerk's officials seemed caught off guard by the moment of levity. The princess's eyes met his, and for the briefest of moments, Alex could see something there, something more than just a diplomatic exchange. There was an unspoken connection. The laughter faded and the seriousness of the negotiations returned, but the atmosphere had changed. What had begun as a cold, tense meeting had transformed into something more personal. Alex could no longer ignore the pull between them. And Oralia, for the first time, seemed to look at him not as a human diplomat, but as something more, a partner in this strange new world of intergalactic diplomacy. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur, but Alex's thoughts kept returning to that moment, to the princess's smile and the way her eyes shone when she had called him darling. It was a small moment, but it was one that would change everything. As the meeting adjourned, Alex stood to leave, his mind racing. "Thank you for your time, Princess Oralia," he said, his voice steady but his heart still pounding. Oralia smiled warmly at him, a smile that seemed to hold 1,000 unspoken words. "It was my pleasure, Captain," she replied, her voice low and inviting. "I look forward to our next meeting." As Alex left the royal chamber, he couldn't help but feel that the universe had just shifted. What had begun as a simple diplomatic mission had suddenly become something far more complex. And for the first time, Alex wasn't sure where this journey would take him, or what role the alien princess would play in his future. But one thing was certain. This was only the beginning. The following day, Captain Alex Sterling couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. His mind kept drifting back to the brief, yet profound, moment shared with Princess Oralia. The way she had looked at him when she called him darling still lingered in his thoughts. It wasn't just her words. It was the way her eyes sparkled with amusement, as though they shared a secret that no one else could understand. As the sun rose over the Vyerk's homeworld, casting a soft glow on the surface of the royal palace, Alex prepared himself for another day of tense negotiations. He had come to Vyerk's with the goal of securing peace between Earth and the Vyerks, but now he found himself facing something far more complicated, an undeniable connection with a princess whose world was so different from his own. He walked through the palace corridors, his footsteps echoing softly. The place was a marvel, a blend of futuristic technology and nature. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, and the air smelled faintly of flowers and something earthy, perhaps the Vyerks' way of maintaining harmony between their technology and the environment. Alex couldn't help but admire the grandeur of it all, even though his focus remained on the task ahead. When he reached the royal chamber, the doors opened, and he was greeted by Oralia. She stood by a window, looking out over the expansive gardens. Her silver hair cascaded down her back like a river of light, and her violet eyes were focused, yet distant. As Alex entered the room, she turned to face him, offering a warm smile that made his heart skip a beat. "Good morning, Captain," she said, her voice carrying a softness that contrasted with her regal demeanor. "Good morning, Princess Oralia," Alex replied, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. He wasn't sure how to act around her anymore. The lines between duty and something more personal had become blurred. "I trust you slept well?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with a hint of curiosity. Alex nodded. "Yes, thank you for asking." Oralia motioned toward the table in the center of the room. "Please sit. We have much to discuss." As they took their seats, the tension from the previous day's meeting still hung in the air. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a bond forming in the most unlikely of places. Alex could see it in her eyes just as she seemed to sense it in his. This wasn't just a diplomatic meeting anymore. Something deeper was at play. The conversation began with the usual formalities. They discussed the state of the peace talks, the terms that had been presented, and the delicate balance they were trying to achieve. But as the hours passed, Alex noticed that the dialogue was shifting. It was no longer just about politics. It was about understanding each other's worlds. "I've been curious," Aurelia said, her voice thoughtful, "about your species' tendency to form such close bonds with one another. In Vyark society, we value intellect above all else. Emotions are controlled, but humans, you wear your hearts on your sleeves. It's both fascinating and, I'll admit, a little perplexing." Alex couldn't help but smile at her observation. "We may not always get it right, but our emotions make us human. They drive us to protect each other, to build connections, and sometimes they even drive us to fight for what we believe in." Aurelia's gaze softened. "I understand that better now. I see it in your eyes, Captain. You're not just here for a treaty. There's something more driving you." Alex was taken aback by her insight. How could she read him so easily? But then again, perhaps it wasn't so surprising. The Vyarks were ancient, wise beyond anything humans could imagine. They had seen countless civilizations rise and fall. And yet here she was, a princess who saw through the walls that Alex had built around himself. Before he could respond, the doors to the chamber opened, and one of the royal aides stepped inside, interrupting their conversation. "Your Excellency," the aide said, bowing respectfully, "the royal banquet is scheduled for later today. The human delegation is invited." Aurelia nodded. "Thank you, we'll be there shortly." As the aide left, Alex felt a sudden shift in the atmosphere. Aurelia stood up, her movements graceful as always. "It would be interesting to see your people in a more social setting. I believe our differences can be bridged through understanding, don't you?" Alex stood as well, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I agree, Princess. It's in our shared experiences that we'll find the common ground we need." Their eyes met, and for a moment the room seemed to disappear. It was just the two of them, standing in the middle of a universe that felt so vast, yet so small in that moment. Their connection was undeniable, and despite the gravity of the situation, Alex couldn't help but wonder what would happen if they allowed themselves to explore it further. The royal banquet later that evening was a grand affair. The palace hall was filled with light, with floating lanterns casting a soft glow over the long tables covered in exotic foods. The Vyarks had a taste for delicacies that Alex couldn't even begin to identify, their scents foreign yet oddly inviting. The human delegation sat at the far end of the hall, surrounded by the Vyarks' royal family and their closest advisors. As the evening wore on, Alex found himself engaged in small talk with various Vyarks officials, but his attention kept drifting to Aurelia. She moved through the crowd with the grace of someone born to command, her silver hair shimmering in the light. There was something magnetic about her, something that made Alex's heart race every time their eyes met. At one point, she crossed the room toward him, a soft smile on her lips. "I see you're surviving our cuisine," she teased, her voice playful. "How are you finding the food?" Alex chuckled, taking a small bite of something that resembled a fruit. "It's different," he said, trying to mask his surprise. "But not bad." Aurelia laughed softly, her eyes lighting up with amusement. "I knew you would say that. We always say that about human food, different but not bad." The conversation between them flowed easily, the laughter and playful banter easing the tension that had hung over their previous meetings. For the first time since arriving on Vyarks, Alex felt like he could breathe. It wasn't just about diplomacy anymore, it was about connection. As the night wore on, the conversation turned more personal. Aurelia asked him about his life on Earth, about his experiences growing up, about the things that shaped him into the man he was today. And as Alex spoke, he realized that, for the first time in a long while, he was speaking freely. There were no walls, no guard up, just two people sharing their stories. "It must be strange being from such a young planet," Aurelia said, her tone thoughtful. "You've only just begun to explore the stars, yet you've already made such an impact on the galaxy." Alex smiled, his gaze softening. "We're small, but we're resourceful. We fight for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against us." Aurelia's eyes met his, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. "I admire that," she said quietly. "There is strength in your people, Captain. I think I can learn a lot from you." Alex's heart skipped a beat. The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. and for the first time since he had arrived on Vierx, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps this connection, this bond, was something worth pursuing. As the night drew to a close, the two of them stood together on the balcony of the palace, overlooking the sprawling gardens below. The stars above seemed to shine brighter in this corner of the galaxy, as though they, too, were witnessing the beginning of something new. "Thank you, Princess," Alex said softly, his voice sincere. "For tonight, for everything." Aurelia smiled, her expression soft. "It's only just begun, Captain. There's much more to come." And as they stood there, the soft breeze ruffling their hair, Alex realized that the future was uncertain. But for the first time, it didn't seem so daunting. With Aurelia by his side, perhaps they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, the following days felt like a whirlwind. Captain Alex Sterling had always prided himself on keeping a level head, but since his arrival on the Vierx homeworld, everything had shifted. The tension in the air wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about something deeper, something more personal. His connection with Princess Aurelia had grown stronger with each passing day. What had begun as a diplomatic mission had evolved into something far more complicated. The peace talks continued, but the atmosphere in the royal palace was charged with an undercurrent of change. Alex found himself meeting with Aurelia more often, outside of the formal meetings. They spent hours talking about their worlds, their histories, and their dreams for the future. The more they shared, the more Alex realized how much they had in common. Despite the vast differences between their species, they were both driven by a desire to create a better future. They both understood what it meant to protect their people, to fight for something greater than themselves. It was a rainy afternoon when everything began to change. Alex had just finished a long day of discussions with the Vierx officials. The peace treaty was nearly complete, but there were still a few details to iron out. He was exhausted, both physically and mentally, and he longed for a quiet moment. As he walked through the palace halls, lost in thought, he found himself standing before a set of glass doors that opened onto a secluded garden. The soft sound of rain tapping against the glass was soothing, and for a moment Alex closed his eyes, letting the calmness wash over him. "Captain Sterling," a familiar voice called from behind him. Alex turned to find Aurelia standing in the doorway, her silver hair slightly damp from the rain. She wore a simple, flowing dress that seemed to shimmer in the soft light, and her violet eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "Princess Aurelia," he said, his voice steady but carrying a hint of something more. "I didn't expect to see you out here." "I could say the same," she replied with a soft smile, stepping closer. "It's peaceful out here, isn't it?" Alex nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. "It is. I needed a break from all the talks." Aurelia took a step forward, her presence as commanding as ever. "You've been working hard, Captain. Perhaps it's time to take a step back and relax for a while." Alex raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "And how do you suggest I do that?" Aurelia's smile widened and she motioned toward the garden. "Come with me, there's something I'd like to show you." Without waiting for a response, she turned and began walking toward the garden, her movements graceful and fluid. Alex hesitated for only a moment before following her, curiosity pulling him forward. The garden was a peaceful sanctuary, filled with vibrant flowers and trees that seemed to glow under the rain. The air was fresh and cool, and the soft sounds of nature surrounded them as they walked through the lush paths. Aurelia led Alex to a small, secluded gazebo where they both sat down on the stone benches, facing each other. "I wanted to take you somewhere away from the palace," Aurelia said, her voice quieter now. "Somewhere we could talk without the pressure of politics." Alex nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "I appreciate that. It's been a lot to take in." "I can imagine," she replied softly, her eyes meeting his. "This isn't easy for either of us. But I think it's important that we understand each other beyond the terms of a treaty. I want to know who you really are, Captain, not just the diplomat or the soldier, but the man." Her words hit him harder than he expected. The princess wasn't just asking about his past, she was asking about him as a person. And for the first time since arriving on Vierx, Alex found himself vulnerable in a way he hadn't allowed himself to be in years. "My life hasn't always been easy," Alex began, his voice low. "I wasn't always part of this diplomatic team. I was a soldier once, fighting in a war that felt like it would never end. I've seen things, done things that I'm not proud of." Oralia's gaze softened, and she leaned forward slightly, her attention completely focused on him. You don't have to tell me everything. I can see that you carry the weight of your experiences with you, but you're here now, and that's what matters. Alex met her eyes, his chest tightening with an emotion he couldn't quite place. I didn't come here to make friends. I came to do a job, but I can't deny that something's changed. Being here with you, it feels like I'm part of something bigger than myself. Oralia's lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but for a moment, no words came. Instead, she reached out and took his hand in hers. The gesture was simple, yet it carried more weight than any treaty or promise ever could. Alex's heart raced as he felt the warmth of her touch, and for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to let go of the walls he had built around his heart. I feel it too, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. There's something between us, Captain, something I didn't expect, but something I can't ignore. The world seemed to slow down as they sat there, hand in hand in the middle of the garden. The rain fell around them, but it no longer felt cold or distant. It felt like a quiet moment in time, a moment that neither of them had anticipated, but one that they both knew would change everything. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. But it didn't last long. A sharp knock on the gazebo door broke the moment, and Alex's heart jumped in his chest. He quickly pulled his hand away, as if the interruption had snapped him back into reality. Oralia looked at him, her expression soft but tinged with a hint of regret. Duty calls, she said quietly, standing up. We can't escape it, can we? Alex stood as well, his mind still spinning from what had just happened. No, I suppose we can't. The moment of vulnerability they had shared was gone, replaced by the weight of responsibility. The peace talks were still on the table, and the future of both their people rested in their hands. But as they walked back toward the palace, side by side, Alex realized that what had begun as a simple diplomatic mission had turned into something much more personal. And for the first time, he wasn't sure where it would all lead. Later that evening, during another tense meeting with the Orcs Council, Alex couldn't focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to the garden, to the moment when he had held Oralia's hand. There was no denying it anymore. His feelings for her had deepened in a way that was impossible to ignore. But as the council presented their final terms, a new voice emerged, one that Alex hadn't expected to hear. One of the Orcs advisors, who had been quietly observing the talks, stood up and spoke in a tone that was anything but diplomatic. This treaty is not just a matter of politics, the advisor said, his voice loud and defiant. It is a matter of our very survival. The humans cannot be trusted. The words hit Alex like a slap to the face. He knew that tensions were high, but he hadn't expected such a direct challenge. The room fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. The pressure mounted as he realized that the stakes had just been raised. Oralia, who had been sitting at the head of the table, looked at the advisor with a mixture of shock and anger. Enough, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. We will not let fear dictate our future. This treaty will be signed, and humanity will be part of it. The council murmured in disagreement, but Oralia's voice carried weight. The room slowly quieted, and for a moment it seemed as if the princess's authority was enough to silence the growing storm. But Alex knew that this was only the beginning. The path to peace would not be easy, and the personal bond he had formed with Oralia would only complicate matters further. And yet, despite the challenges, one thing was certain. He would do whatever it took to see this through, to ensure that the future of both their peoples was secure. As the meeting drew to a close, Alex and Oralia exchanged a brief glance, their eyes speaking volumes. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. And as the rain continued to fall outside, Alex couldn't help but wonder what the future held for them, not just as diplomats, but as something more.